stood in the observation deck of the Galactic Council station, his scaled hands clasped behind his back. Through the massive window, he watched the stars stretch endlessly into the void. He had served as a military observer for the Republic for 30 years. In that time, he had seen 17 wars, watched 12 species fall to conquest, and learned to recognize weakness when he saw it. And today, he was looking at weakness. The human delegation sat at the far end of the council chamber. There were only 3 of them. A captain named led their group, his dark hair cut short and neat. Beside him sat a young woman named who worked as their communications officer. The third human said nothing, just watched and listened. Had studied humans for the past 20 years, ever since they had joined the Galactic Council. They were a strange species, soft skin that could barely withstand a scratch. No claws, no natural armor, no venom. There had weak gravity compared to most civilized planets. They were polite, diplomatic, and eager to trade. In council meetings, they rarely raised their voices. They seemed content to watch and learn from older species. Weak thought harmless. The Dominion, however, was anything but harmless. The Empire had conquered 40 star systems in the past 50 years. Their warriors stood 3 meters tall, with exoskeletons that could shrug off most weapons. They fought with numbers and brutality. No species had successfully resisted them for long. And now, the wanted human worlds. The council chamber filled with delegates from 100 species. The air buzzed with translation devices, turning thousands of languages into comprehensible sound. The ambassador, a massive creature with 6 legs and mandibles that clicked when it spoke, rose from its platform. The Dominion claims the 7 outer colonies of the human territory, the ambassador declared. Its voice sounded like grinding stone. These worlds are strategically valuable. Humans may relocate their populations within 6 standard months. This is our final offer. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. 7 colonies meant millions of human lives would need to move. Watched the human delegation. Captain's face showed no emotion. Typed something on her data pad. The third human just stared at the ambassador. The council chairman, a gaseous being that floated in a containment sphere, spoke with a voice that echoed from speakers. The human delegation may respond. Captain stood slowly. He was not tall by galactic standards. His uniform was simple, dark blue with minimal decoration. He looked like someone who worked behind a desk, not a warrior. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured. "Thank you, Chairman. The human government has reviewed the demands." He paused, looking directly at the ambassador. "We decline." The chamber erupted in noise. His inner eyelids blinked in surprise. Other delegates turned to each other, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony. The ambassador's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. "You decline," the ambassador hissed. "You understand what this means. The Dominion does not make empty threats. We have conquered species far stronger than you. Your military is small. Your worlds are poorly defended. You have no allies who would risk war for you." Remained standing, his posture relaxed. "We understand completely. Those are our worlds. Our people live there. They have homes, families, lives they've built. We will not abandon them." "Then you choose war," the ambassador said. "Your species will learn the price of defiance." Expected the human captain to show some emotion. Fear, anger, regret, something. Instead, his expression became very still. His eyes, which had been polite and professional, changed. They became cold and distant, like looking into deep water. "We didn't want this," said quietly, "but we'll defend what's ours." There was something in the way he said it that made scales prickle. It wasn't a boast or a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with a certainty that seemed out of place for such a weak species. The ambassador turned and left the chamber, followed by its delegation. The council chairman tried to call for further negotiation, but they had made their decision. The meeting dissolved into chaos as delegates argued about what would happen next. approached the human delegation as they prepared to leave. "Captain," he said, his universal translator converting his hissing speech into human language, "may I speak with you?" Turned and nodded. "Of course, Ambassador, we've met before, haven't we?" "Yes, several times. I wanted to," paused, choosing his words carefully. "I wanted to ask if your government truly understands the situation. They have never lost a war. They will bring hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors. Your military is not prepared for this." Looked like she wanted to say something, but raised his hand slightly, and she stayed quiet. "We appreciate your concern," said, "but our decision is final." "Why?" asked. "Why not negotiate? Give them 1 or 2 colonies, save your species from destruction." For a moment something flickered across his face. It might have been sadness or perhaps memory of something long past. Then the cold look returned. "Because if we give them colonies today, they'll ask for more tomorrow. And if we agree to move our people once, we'll be moving them forever. That's not the kind of species we are." "What kind of species are you?" asked. Looked at him for a long moment. "The kind that remembers, the kind that learns, the kind that doesn't repeat old mistakes." The human captain walked away, followed by his delegation. Watched them go, confused by the answer. What did humans remember? What had they learned? They had been in space for less than 200 years. They were children compared to most galactic civilizations. Later that day, met with other ambassadors in an informal gathering. Everyone wanted to talk about the humans' foolish decision. "They'll surrender within a month," said the representative, a bird-like creature with purple feathers. "They will destroy their first colony, and the humans will beg for terms." "I give them 2 weeks," another delegate said. "Humans are soft. They value individual lives too much. The first casualties will break their will." Said nothing, but he couldn't shake the memory of Captain's eyes. That cold, ancient look that seemed wrong on such a young species. In his quarters that night, filed his official report to the military command. He wrote that war was inevitable. He predicted they would win easily. He recommended staying neutral and maintaining trade relations with whoever controlled human space after the conquest. But as he finished the report, he added one final note for his superiors. "There is something about the humans I do not understand. When their captain accepted the possibility of war, he showed no fear. Instead, there was a look in his eyes I have seen only in apex predators. I recommend caution and further observation." He sent the report and prepared for sleep. In 1 month, the fleet would reach the first human colony, had requested permission to observe the battle as a neutral party. He wanted to see how humans fought. He wanted to understand what he had seen in Captain's eyes. He would soon learn that humanity had a legacy that stretched back thousands of years, a legacy written in blood and fire, in survival and adaptation, a legacy that the galaxy was about to witness for the first time. And like the galaxy would finally understand why humans had chosen peace. It was because they knew the alternative far too well. The war fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel like a swarm of metal locusts. 300 warships, each one larger than anything humans had built, watched from the observation deck of the command carrier, his status as a neutral observer giving him access to witness the battle. The target was Colony, a human settlement on a rocky moon orbiting a gas giant, home to 2 million humans. They had chosen it specifically as an example. Destroy one colony completely, and the others would surrender without a fight. "Human fleet detected," a tactical officer announced. 40 vessels, standard defensive formation. The admiral, a veteran of 30 campaigns, clicked his mandibles in satisfaction. 40 against 300. They cannot possibly believe they can win. Studied the human fleet on the tactical display. The ships were smaller than vessels, but they had clean lines and efficient designs. They held position between the fleet and the colony, not advancing, not retreating, just waiting. "They should run," said quietly. "They should," the Admiral agreed. "But pride makes species do foolish things. We will teach them about power." The fleet advanced in a standard wedge formation, their superior numbers allowing them to present an overwhelming front. It was a formation that had broken every defense it had encountered. Then the human ships scattered. Not in panic, but in a coordinated movement that sent them in dozens of different directions. Some dove toward the gas giant. Others raced toward an asteroid field that orbited nearby. A few small groups sped away at angles that made no tactical sense. "They flee," an officer said with satisfaction. But notice something. The ships weren't running away from the battle. They were repositioning, and the fleet, maintaining its wedge formation, was following the largest group of human ships toward the asteroid field. "Admiral," said carefully, "the asteroids could provide cover for—" "We know human tactics," the Admiral interrupted. "They will hide like cowards. We will dig them out." The fleet entered the asteroid field in pursuit. The space rocks here were massive, some larger than cities, perfect for hiding. The ships spread out to search, their formation breaking apart to navigate the obstacles. That's when the humans attacked. A human cruiser emerged from behind an asteroid at full speed, its weapons already firing. It tore through a destroyer before the larger ship could react, then disappeared behind another rock. Seconds later, 3 more human ships appeared from different angles, striking isolated vessels before vanishing again. The fleet tried to reform, but the asteroids made formation impossible. Human ships knew this field. They moved through it like fish in water, appearing and disappearing, striking and retreating. They never stayed to fight for long, just hit and run, over and over. Watched in fascination. This wasn't the type of warfare he knew. They relied on superior force and direct confrontation. The humans were fighting like hunters stalking prey through a forest. "Withdraw from the asteroid field," the Admiral finally ordered after losing 20 ships with almost no damage to the human fleet. They pulled back, regrouping in open space. The human ships didn't pursue. They simply waited at the edge of the asteroid field, daring them to come back. "Land ground forces," the Admiral commanded. "We'll take the colony directly." Troop carriers descended toward colony while the fleet held position. 100,000 warriors, each one a killing machine bred for war. The colony had only 8,000 human soldiers defending it, according to intelligence reports. Transferred to a ground observation post to watch the surface battle. He wanted to see how humans fought when they couldn't run. They landed in force, establishing a perimeter around their landing zones. Then they began their advance toward the colony's main settlement. The terrain was rough, covered in rock formations and deep valleys, but warriors could cross any terrain. The first attack came from nowhere. Explosions erupted under formations, mines hidden beneath the rock. Then human soldiers appeared on cliff tops, firing weapons before disappearing behind cover. They charged the positions but found them empty. The humans were already somewhere else. More ambushes, more traps. The humans never stood and fought. They would strike from cover, kill dozens of, then retreat before the enemy could respond. They used the terrain like a weapon, turning every rock and valley into a killing ground. A commander, frustrated by the tactics, demanded reinforcements. "The humans fight like cowards. They refuse to meet us in battle." But was beginning to understand. This wasn't cowardice. This was something else entirely. He watched as a human commander named coordinated her forces from a command post built into a cave system. She was young, probably no more than 30 years by human reckoning. She studied the tactical map with cold, calculating eyes. Enemy force moving through Valley 7, an officer reported to her. "How many?" asked. 2,000. "Collapse the valley walls," she said without hesitation. "Then seal the exits with fire teams. No survivors. The officer nodded and relayed the orders. Minutes later, carefully placed explosives brought tons of rock down on the formation. The few who survived the collapse found themselves trapped, picked off by human soldiers who fired from protected positions. Felt his scales grow cold. The humans weren't just fighting, they were executing a plan. Every ambush, every trap, every retreat had a purpose. They were bleeding the army slowly, carefully, efficiently. He accessed the casualty reports. After 3 days of fighting, they had lost 40,000 warriors. The humans had lost 800. How, he whispered to himself, how are they doing this? He watched more of the battle. He saw human soldiers fighting in small units, never more than 10 or 12 together. They communicated with hand signals when possible, keeping radio silence unless necessary. They moved through the terrain as if they had lived there all their lives, even though the colony was less than 20 years old. One incident burned itself into his memory. A group of 6 human soldiers, surrounded by 50 warriors, fought from inside a bunker complex. They had overwhelming numbers. They should have overrun the position in minutes. Instead, the humans held for 6 hours. They used every angle, every corner, every piece of cover. When they ran out of ammunition for one weapon, they switched to another. When those ran out, they used explosives. When those were gone, they used the environment itself, collapsing tunnels and creating. By the time reinforcements arrived, all 6 humans were wounded, but they had killed 38 warriors. The position held. Requested permission to speak with a human prisoner. They had captured a few wounded soldiers. He wanted to understand. The prisoner they brought him was a young man named. He had injuries across his chest and one arm hung useless at his side, but his eyes were alert and aware. "Why do you fight this way?" asked through the translator. "Your people avoid direct combat. You use terrain and ambush. These are not the tactics of soldiers." Smiled, though it looked painful. "These are exactly the tactics of soldiers, real soldiers." "I don't understand." "How long have your people been at peace?" asked. "Thought about it. 3,000 years. We had wars before that, but they ended when we unified our world." 3,000 years, repeated. "We've had peace for less than 200. Before that, we fought constantly. We had wars on our world that killed millions. We developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet. We learned every way it was possible to kill." "But you're so weak physically," protested. "No natural weapons." "That's exactly why we learned to fight smart," said. "Strong species can rely on strength. We had to rely on our minds. We learned to use tools, terrain, tactics. We learned that a weaker force can defeat a stronger one if they're smarter." "Where did you learn these tactics?" Smile faded. "From history, from thousands of years of human conflict. We had battles called Thermopylae where 300 held against thousands. We had sieges like Stalingrad where defenders turned every building into a fortress. We had jungles like Vietnam where a smaller force used terrain to defeat a superior enemy. Every human soldier studies these battles. We learn from them." Felt understanding begin to dawn. "You've been preparing for this kind of war for your entire history." "Not preparing," corrected. "Living it, fighting it, learning from it. Every generation of humans fought someone. We learned or we died. The ones who survived passed on what they learned, for thousands of years." That night watched as the admiral reviewed the casualty reports. 60,000 warriors lost. The colony still held. The human defenders had retreated to the settlement itself, but showed no signs of surrendering. "We need more troops," the admiral said, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "How is this possible?" another officer asked. "They're primitives. They've been in space for less time than my lifetime." Spoke quietly. "They're not primitives, they're survivors, and they've been learning how to fight since before your species discovered fire." The officers looked at him, confused. "Withdraw," advised. "Request negotiations. This won't end the way you think." But the admiral's pride was wounded. "We will crush them," he declared. Said nothing. He simply watched the tactical displays and thought about what it said. Humans had 10,000 years of war written into their history. Every tactic, every strategy, every lesson learned in blood. And the galaxy was fighting them for the first time. They had experience from 50 years of conquest. Humans had experience of survival. It wasn't a fair fight. Just not in the way anyone expected. Couldn't sleep. The images from Colony played repeatedly in his mind. Human soldiers fighting with a precision and ruthlessness that seemed impossible for such a young species. The cold efficiency in Commander's eyes. The smile on the wounded soldier's face when he spoke about their history of war. After 3 weeks, they had withdrawn from Colony. They had lost 90,000 warriors against 8,000 human defenders. It was the first military defeat the Dominion had suffered in recorded history. Needed answers. He needed to understand what he had witnessed. He returned to the Galactic Council Station and requested access to the historical archives. Every member species was required to submit their complete history when joining the Council. Most species provided sanitized versions, highlighting their achievements and cultural development. But the records were there, deep in the database, protected but accessible to ambassadors. Entered the archive chamber, a vast room filled with holographic interfaces and data storage systems. He stood before a terminal and entered his request. Human history, complete records, focus on military conflicts. The system processed for a moment, then displayed a warning. Selected data contains disturbing content. Graphic descriptions of violence, warfare, and mass casualties. Recommend advisory oversight for sensitive species. Dismissed the warning and began reading. The first file that opened showed a timeline of human civilization. 10,000 years of recorded history. Started scrolling through, expecting to see the usual pattern. Early tribal conflicts, a few wars during the unification period, then peace as the species matured. Instead, the timeline was red. Red markers indicated military conflicts. The entire timeline blazed with them. Wars, battles, skirmishes, rebellions, conquests. Thousands upon thousands of conflicts, stretching from humanity's earliest days to just 200 years ago. Felt his breathing quicken. This couldn't be right. No species fought this much and survived. He opened detailed records, conflicts called World War I and World War II. The names sounded simple, but the descriptions made his scales feel cold. Millions dead, entire continents turned into battlefields, weapons that killed from distances his people had never imagined until they reached space. He read about something humans called the wars, 23 years of continuous fighting across an entire continent. Multiple nations locked in endless combat. He found records of the Mongol conquests, a single human empire that had conquered more territory than the Dominion, using nothing but pre-industrial weapons and cavalry. There were so many wars. The 100 Years' War, which actually lasted longer than 100 years. The 30 Years' War. The 7 Years' War. Wars of religion. Wars of conquest. Wars for resources. Wars for ideology. And these were just the major conflicts. Between them were countless smaller wars, civil wars, revolutions, border disputes. Humanity had never known true peace. Opened a file on human weapon development. He watched the progression in horror. Stone weapons became bronze, bronze became iron, iron became steel, then gunpowder, then automatic weapons, then explosives, then chemical weapons, then nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Stared at the screen. Humans had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet while they were still confined to one world. They had built enough of these weapons to kill every living thing on Earth dozens of times over. Most species didn't develop such weapons until they had reached interstellar space and had dozens of worlds to lose. Humans had built them when they had only one world, when destroying it meant destroying themselves. And they had used them twice on each other. Read the accounts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki with growing disbelief. Entire cities destroyed in an instant, hundreds of thousands dead. And then, humanity had stopped. They had looked at what they created, at what they had done, and decided never to use such weapons again. But they kept them, they knew how to make them, they simply chose not to. They learned restraint, whispered, not from weakness, from fear of themselves. A voice behind him said, "That's exactly right." Spun around. A human woman stood in the archive chamber. She was older, perhaps 50 by human standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair. She wore simple civilian clothing. "I apologize for startling you," the woman said. "I'm doctor. I'm a historian. The archive system me when someone accessed our military records." "I needed to understand," said, "what I saw on Colony, the way your soldiers fought." Walked closer, looking at the displays, had been reading. Her expression was sad. "Our history is difficult for other species to comprehend. You've all had peace for so long, thousands of years for some of you. Humans had peace for," she paused, thinking, "maybe a few decades at a time, between wars." "Why?" asked. "Why so much conflict?" "Many reasons," said. She gestured, and the display shifted to show a map of Earth. Our world had separate continents isolated from each other. We developed dozens of different civilizations, each with their own beliefs, resources, and ambitions. We competed, we fought, and every time we fought, we learned. She pulled up images of ancient battles, armies with spears and shields. "This is how we started. Simple weapons, simple tactics, but we learned. We studied what worked and what didn't. Winners passed on their knowledge. Losers either learned or disappeared." The images shifted to show medieval warfare. Castles, sieges, armored knights. We learned about fortifications, about supply lines, about the importance of terrain and weather. Then came images of muskets and cannons. We learned about gunpowder and ranged combat, how to use formation and discipline. Then machine guns and trenches. We learned about industrial warfare, how to mobilize entire nations, how to use technology for killing. Then tanks and aircraft. We learned combined arms warfare, how to use multiple types of forces together. Then nuclear weapons and missiles. We learned about mutually assured destruction. We learned that some wars can't be won, only prevented. Watched the progression with growing understanding. Every generation fought, every generation learned, every generation taught the next. "Yes," said softly, "we didn't choose this path, it's just what happened. We evolved on a world with many apex predators. We had to be smart to survive. And when we became the dominant species, we turned that intelligence on each other." "But you stopped," said. 200 years ago, you achieved peace." Smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "We didn't stop because we suddenly became enlightened. We stopped because we finally scared ourselves enough. We stood on the edge of extinction, with enough weapons to destroy our world, and we realized we had to change or die." She pulled up records of the human unification period. It took 50 years of hard work, treaties, compromises, building trust. We had to learn a new skill, one we'd never really practiced: cooperation. Not with our tribe or nation, but with all humans. "And you succeeded." "We did. We united our world. We turned our energies to space exploration. We met other species and learned from them. We became peaceful," she looked at directly. "But we never forgot." "Forgot what?" "How to fight, how to survive. We teach our children about our history, not to glorify it, but to remember the cost. Every human soldier studies the great battles of our past, not because we want war, but because we know it might come. And if it does, we need to be ready." Thought about Commander, about the tactics she had used, about how the human defenders had fought on Colony. "You were ready." "We're always ready," said. "That's our legacy. 10,000 years of warfare taught us one critical lesson: hope for peace but prepare for war. Gestured at the displays. Other species will see this. They'll fear you. Perhaps, acknowledged. But we'd rather be feared and peaceful than trusted and dead. We tried being trusting once. We tried assuming everyone wanted peace. But the universe isn't always kind to the peaceful. The learned that said. They assumed we were weak because we chose peace. They confused kindness with weakness. Many species do, pulled up an image of modern human soldiers. We're not warriors despite being peaceful. We're peaceful despite being warriors. Do you understand the difference? Thought about it. You have the capacity for violence but choose not to use it. Exactly. We're not passive pacifists who don't know how to fight. We're people who know exactly how to fight, who understand the cost, and who choose a different path. But when someone forces us to fight, she trailed off, the implication clear. You remember all those lessons, finished. Every single one. Looked at the timeline again at 10,000 years of human conflict. He thought about his own people, They had fought wars 3,000 years ago during their unification. But that was one period of conflict, maybe 200 years of sporadic fighting. Then they had achieved peace. Humans had fought for their entire history. Generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. They had refined warfare into an art form. And then, despite all that knowledge and capability, they had chosen peace. That was terrifying in its own way. Not the violence, but the discipline. The self-control required to possess such knowledge and not use it. What will happen now? Asked. They won't stop with one defeat. His expression became cold. Then they'll learn more lessons. We'd prefer to teach them with words, but if necessary, we'll teach them the way we taught ourselves. Through blood. Through blood, she confirmed. We don't want that. War is terrible even when you win, but if they insist, she shrugged. We've fought worse odds against more dangerous enemies. Believed her. After seeing what he'd seen, reading what he'd read, he believed humanity could fight and win against almost anyone. I need to report this to my government, he said. Of course, the records are open. We don't hide our history, smiled sadly. We just wish more species understood what it means before they force us to demonstrate. As left the archives, one thought dominated his mind. The Dominion had spent 50 years conquering the galaxy. They thought they were the apex predators of space. But humanity had spent 10,000 years learning how to be apex predators on their own world. And they had brought those lessons to the stars. The Dominion's response to their defeat at Colony was swift and brutal. They assembled their entire military force, something they had never needed to do before. 2,000 warships, 5 million warriors, the largest armada in recorded galactic history. They would crush humanity completely. Watched from the Galactic Council station as reports came in. They were attacking 12 human systems simultaneously. It was a strategy designed to overwhelm, to spread human forces too thin, to force surrender through impossible odds. The Council convened an emergency session. Species after species stood to speak, but none offered to help humanity. Fear of retaliation kept them silent. The humans stood alone. Ambassador attended the session and was struck by how calm he appeared. The man's was under attack. His species faced extinction, yet he showed no panic, no desperation. The Council will remain neutral, the chairman announced. This conflict is between the Dominion and humanity. We will not intervene. Simply nodded. We understand. We don't ask for your help. We ask only that you remember who started this war and who refused to stop it through negotiation. He left the chamber without another word, followed him into the corridor. Captain called, "May I speak with you?" Stopped and turned. Up close could see the tiredness in the human's eyes, but also something else. Determination, resolve. "I've been studying your history," said. I've seen what your people are capable of, but 2,000 ships against your fleet. The numbers are overwhelming." "Numbers matter," agreed. "But they're not everything. They have more ships than us, more warriors, more resources, but we have something they don't." "What?" "Experience with total war." His expression became cold. "They have conquered for 50 years. We've been fighting for 10,000. They've never faced a war where survival itself was at stake. We've faced that kind of war 100 times." "What will you do?" "Whatever is necessary," said simply. "We activated Protocol Indomitable 2 days ago." Had never heard that term. What does that mean? "It means our government has authorized total warfare. Every resource, every person, every advantage we can create. No holding back. No half measures. We fight until we win or until there's nothing left to fight with." The human turned and walked away, leaving with a cold feeling in his chest. He requested permission to observe the war from multiple fronts. His government, worried about potential expansion, agreed. They wanted intelligence on how this war developed. Traveled to the system, where a major battle was unfolding. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1, but they weren't fighting like expected. Captain, the young communications officer he'd met months ago, now commanded a destroyer. Watched from a monitoring station as her ship held a position near a jump point, preventing reinforcements from entering the system. 30 ships converged on her position, one destroyer against 30 cruisers. She should have retreated. Instead, she fought. Her ship moved with incredible precision, using the gravitational currents near the jump point to accelerate and decelerate in ways that made pursuit difficult. She fired, then moved, then fired again. Her weapons targeted specific systems on enemy ships, not trying to destroy them but to disable them. Engines, weapons, communication arrays, each shot calculated for maximum disruption. For 14 hours, her single ship held that position. By the time reinforcements arrived, she had disabled 17 vessels and destroyed 3 more. Her ship was barely functional, held together by emergency patches and determination. Requested permission to speak with her after the battle. She agreed, though she looked exhausted. "How?" asked simply. "How did one ship hold against 30? Smiled tiredly. "Training. We drill for impossible scenarios. We practice until fighting becomes instinct, and we study history." She pulled up a tactical display. "This formation I used, it's based on a naval battle from our world called. One commander named Nelson defeated a larger fleet by breaking their formation and creating chaos. I adapted his tactics for space combat." "You study battles from before you had spaceships." "The principles don't change," said. "Tactics evolve, weapons improve, but the core concepts remain. Confusion, initiative, exploiting weakness. These ideas are thousands of years old and they still work." Moved to another front, this time to observe ground combat. They had landed massive forces on a human colony called 200,000 warriors against 15,000 human defenders. The human commander was General, a man in his 60s who had spent 40 years in the military. Watched him coordinate the defense from a command bunker deep underground. They expected a conventional defense, fortified positions, artillery trying to hold territory. Instead, humans gave ground. They evacuated civilians ahead of the advance, then turned every building, every street, every tunnel into a trap. They occupied empty cities that became death traps. Watched as warriors entered a residential district. The buildings exploded around them. Not immediately, but in sequence, calculated to drive the survivors into prepared killing zones where human soldiers waited. "This is cruel," an observer said, watching from the same monitoring station as. "They turned their own cities into weapons." "It's effective," replied. He was past being shocked. He was learning. General's voice came over the tactical channel. "Enemy force entering Sector 7. Detonate charges in Sequence 3. Infantry teams prepare to advance. More explosions, more casualties. The invasion force that had numbered 200,000 was now below 150,000, and the humans hadn't even committed to a major engagement yet. Studied the human strategy. They were doing what they had done at Colony, but on a massive scale. Using terrain, using traps, using every advantage to inflict maximum casualties while minimizing their own losses. But there was more. Began to notice patterns across all 12 battle fronts. The human forces weren't fighting in isolation. They were coordinating at a level he had never seen before. When forces concentrated on one system, humans in other systems would launch attacks, forcing them to divide their attention. When supply lines extended too far, human strike teams would appear from nowhere to destroy supply depots. It was like watching a single organism defend itself, even though the battles took place across light years of space. He requested an interview with General. The general agreed, though the battle was still ongoing. "How are you coordinating across such distances?" asked. "Your forces respond to movements within hours, sometimes minutes." Smiled grimly. "We're using doctrine developed over centuries of human warfare. It's called distributed command. Every unit, every ship, every commander knows the overall strategy and has authority to make decisions based on the situation. We don't wait for orders from above. We see an opportunity, we take it." That seems chaotic. It would be for a species that hasn't practiced it for thousands of years. But we have. Every human military officer studies the campaigns of leaders like Napoleon, son. We learn to think independently while working toward a common goal. Thought about his own military. They had rigid command structures. Orders came from above and subordinates followed them. It was organized and efficient, but it required constant communication. Humans fought like a school of fish, each individual responding to the environment while maintaining formation. 3 months into the war, they had lost 40% of their invasion force. They had not captured a single human world. Every battle became a grinding war of attrition that they were losing. Received reports that shocked the galactic community. The Queen was requesting negotiation. For the first time in their history, the Dominion was asking for peace. Traveled to watch the peace negotiations. Captain, now promoted to Admiral, led the human delegation. The Queen attended remotely, her massive form displayed on a holographic screen. "We underestimated you," the Queen said. Her voice, translated into human language, sounded like grinding metal. "We thought you weak. We thought you would break. We were wrong." "You were warned," Admiral replied. "We asked for peace. You chose war." "We choose peace now," the Queen said. "What are your terms?" Expected humans to demand territory, reparations, submission. Instead, Admiral presented terms that surprised everyone. "The Dominion will withdraw from all occupied territories taken in the last 50 years, said. "You will provide reparations to the species you conquered. You will reduce your military to defensive levels. And you will agree to a permanent non-aggression treaty with humanity and any species under our protection." "And if we refuse?" the Queen asked. His expression didn't change. "Then we continue fighting until you have no military left to refuse with. We didn't start this war, but we will end it, one way or another." The Queen's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect or fear. "You fight like demons." "We fight like humans," corrected. "We tried to avoid this. We gave you every chance to choose peace. But when you forced war upon us, we fought with everything we learned from 10,000 years of conflict." He leaned forward slightly. "And we learned a lot." The Queen accepted the terms. The war ended not with humanity's surrender, but with this defeat. As watched the treaty signing, he understood something profound. Humans hadn't just won battles. They had won a war of will. They had shown the something the Dominion had never experienced before, an enemy that would not break, would not surrender, and would fight with absolute efficiency until victory was achieved. They had conquered 40 species, but they had never fought a species that had been at war with itself for its entire history. They had never fought humans. And now the galaxy knew what that meant. Thought about his initial assessment of humanity: weak, harmless primitives. He had been so terribly wrong. Humans weren't weak, they were disciplined. They weren't harmless, they were careful. They weren't primitives. They were inheritors of the most comprehensive military legacy in the known galaxy. And they had chosen peace despite all of it. That, realized, was the most terrifying thing of all. The Galactic Council chamber was filled to capacity. Every species had sent representatives. The war between humans and the had ended 3 months ago, but the implications continued to ripple through galactic society. Stood at the speaker's platform, his position as chief observer of the war giving him authority to address the council. He had compiled extensive reports on the conflict. Data, tactical analyses, casualty figures, but numbers alone couldn't capture what he needed to convey. He needed to help them understand. "Honored delegates," began, his voice carried by translators to the hundreds of beings present. "I have observed 17 wars in my career. I have watched empires rise and fall. I thought I understood warfare. I was wrong." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, continued. "When the Dominion declared war on humanity, I predicted the humans would surrender within a month. I believed they were weak, unprepared, too peaceful to wage effective warfare." He paused, letting his words settle. "I have never been more wrong about anything in my life." He activated a holographic display showing battle footage from Colony. Human soldiers executing precise ambushes. Commander directing her forces with cold efficiency. "We misunderstood everything about humans. We saw their preference for peace and assumed it meant inability to fight. We saw their diplomacy and assumed it meant weakness. We saw their kindness and assumed it meant vulnerability." The display shifted to show Admiral addressing his fleet. "But humans aren't peaceful because they don't know how to fight. They're peaceful because they know exactly how to fight, and they understand the cost." His voice grew stronger. "They have spent 10,000 years at war, not occasional conflicts like most of us experienced during our unification. Constant, continuous warfare spanning their entire recorded history." A delegate from the species stood. "Surely you exaggerate, Ambassador. No species could survive that much conflict." "I thought the same," replied. "But I accessed their historical records, I spoke with their historians, I watched their soldiers fight, it's all true." He pulled up the timeline he had seen in the archives. 10,000 years, thousands of wars, millions of battles. Every generation of humans learned how to fight from the generation before. Every tactic, every strategy, every hard-won lesson passed down through their history. He showed footage of the Battle of, where Captain's single destroyer had held against 30 ships. "They don't just train for war. They study it like we study science or art. Every human military officer learns from battles fought centuries ago on there. Tactics developed before they had space travel are adapted for modern combat. Strategies from their ancient past still work because the fundamental principles of warfare don't change." Another delegate spoke up. "If they're so dangerous, should we not fear them? Should we not restrict their military?" Look directly at that delegate. That's exactly the wrong conclusion. Yes, humans are dangerous, but they're dangerous the way a trained guard is dangerous, not the way a rabid beast is dangerous. They have discipline, control, restraint. He showed images of human cities, civilians going about peaceful lives. Humans developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet while they still lived on one world. They could have annihilated themselves. Many of us thought they would, but they didn't. They looked at what they were capable of and chose to step back from the edge. His voice softened. "That's what we failed to understand. Humans chose peace, not because they had to, Not because they were forced to. They chose it despite having the capability for war. That choice, that discipline, is their greatest strength. He switched the display to show the treaty signing. They learned this lesson the hard way. They assumed human peace meant human weakness. They were wrong. And now the Dominion, which has never lost a war, has agreed to terms dictated by a species they thought they could easily conquer. The council chairman spoke. "What do you recommend, Ambassador?" Had thought long and hard about this moment. His next words would shape galactic policy toward humanity for generations. "I recommend we acknowledge what humans are. Not weak, not primitive, not helpless. They are perhaps the most militarily capable species in the galaxy precisely because they've had the most practice. And I recommend we be grateful that they choose to use that capability only in defense." He paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled species. "I also recommend that we make them responsible for galactic defense, not as conquerors, not as overlords, but as protectors, because they understand something the rest of us forgot long ago. Peace is not the absence of the capacity for war. Peace is the choice not to use that capacity." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some species argued against giving humans any military authority. Others supported its recommendation. In the end, a vote was called. The measure passed. Humanity would become the head of the Galactic Defense Council. After the session ended, made his way to the human delegation's quarters. Admiral met him at the door. "The vote passed," said. "The Council wants humanity to lead galactic defense." His expression was difficult to read. "We didn't ask for that responsibility." "No," agreed. "But you're the only ones qualified for it. You're the only ones who truly understand warfare." "Understanding warfare doesn't mean wanting to practice it," said quietly. He gestured for to enter, and they walked to a viewing window overlooking the station. "I've been thinking about something," said after a moment. "Before all this, I thought your preference for diplomacy was naivety. Now I understand its wisdom. You try so hard to avoid war because you know what war really costs." "Every human knows," said. "We teach our children about our history, not to glorify it but to make sure they understand why we chose a different path. Every child learns about the world wars, about the nuclear weapons, about the millions who died in conflicts that seem pointless now. We remember so we don't repeat." "But you trained for war anyway," observed. "You prepared." "Hope for peace, prepare for war," quoted. "It's an old human saying. We want peace. We work for peace. But we know that sometimes peace isn't enough. Sometimes you meet someone like the who only understands strength." Thought about the battles he'd witnessed, the precision, the efficiency, the cold calculation. "Will you accept the Council's offer?" he asked. Was quiet for a long moment. "We'll accept, but we have conditions. We'll establish a galactic defense force, but it will be exactly that, defense. We won't be used for conquest or expansion. We'll protect member species from aggression, but we won't enforce internal politics. And most importantly, we'll always try diplomacy first." "Always." "Always," confirmed. "War should be the last option, not the first. Every human knows that. We've fought too many wars to forget that lesson." Later that week, attended the formal ceremony establishing the Galactic Defense Council. Admiral was appointed as its first commander. General would oversee strategic planning. Captain would handle intelligence and communications. But before the official duties began, the human delegation invited to join them for a private ceremony on Earth. They traveled to humanities and experienced the planet that had given birth to such a unique species. Cities filled with billions of peaceful civilians, oceans and forests and mountains, a beautiful world that had survived 10,000 years of human conflict. They took him to a memorial garden in a city called Seoul. It was enormous, stretching for kilometers, and it was filled with names. "This is one of many such memorials," Admiral explained. Every human who died in warfare, from our earliest recorded history to the present, is remembered here or in another memorial like it. Walked among the stone walls covered in names, millions of names, billions, each one a life lost to war. Why, asked, why remember all this pain? Doctor, the historian he'd met in the archives, answered. She had been invited to the ceremony, because forgetting would dishonor their sacrifice, and because remembering helps us understand why we chose peace. Every name here is a lesson, a reminder of what we were and what we chose to become. They walked to a central monument. It was simple, just a stone pillar with words engraved in human languages and then translated for alien visitors. Read the translation. We remember those who fell so that future generations might live in peace. We carry the burden of their lessons so our children never need to learn them again. We train for war so we may preserve peace. We remember the past so we may build a better future. Standing there, surrounded by the names of billions who had died in humanity's long history of warfare, finally understood. Humans weren't aggressive despite being peaceful. They were peaceful despite being capable of aggression. They had looked into the abyss of their own capacity for destruction and chosen to step back. But they never forgot what they saw. That was their terrifying legacy. Not the wars they fought, not the weapons they built, not the tactics they mastered. Their legacy was the discipline to choose peace while maintaining the capability for war, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to talk, the restraint to be gentle while possessing the strength to be unstoppable. I was wrong about your people, said quietly. I thought you were weak, but strength isn't just about fighting. It's about knowing when not to fight. Admiral placed a hand on shoulder. It was a gesture of friendship, something that would have seemed impossible months ago. We learned that lesson the hard way, said. Through thousands of years and billions of lives, we don't want other species to learn it the same way. That's why we'll accept the responsibility of defending the galaxy, not to wage war but to prevent it. And if war becomes necessary, asked. His expression became cold and recognized the look. The same look he'd seen in the council chamber months ago. The look of someone who understood violence completely and chose carefully when to use it. Then we'll end it, said simply. Quickly, efficiently, and with minimal loss of life. Because we know how, and because every war that continues is another lesson we'd rather not teach. As left Earth, he looked back at the beautiful blue world below. A planet that had given birth to a species that spent 10,000 years learning how to destroy itself, and then chose not to. He filed his final report to the Republic. In it he wrote, humanity's greatest achievement is not their military capability. It's their choice to use that capability only when necessary. They are the most dangerous species in the galaxy because they know exactly how to fight, and they've learned when not to. We should be grateful they're on our side. The galactic community would spend decades learning to understand humans. Some would continue to fear them. Others would respect them. But all would remember the lesson they had learned. When humans entered battle, the galaxy saw their terrifying legacy. 10,000 years of warfare, distilled into discipline, tactics, and an unbreakable will to survive. But more importantly, the galaxy learned that humans had chosen to leave that legacy behind, carrying only the lessons forward. They fought when they had to, but they preferred peace. And that made all the difference.